We are being hypnotized by people like this. Newsreaders, politicians, teachers, lecturers. We are in a country and in a world that is being run by unbelievably sick people. The chasm between what we're told is going on and what is really going on is absolutely enormous.
Oh yeah, dude. There's some Nephilim shit.
It's like we all know what's going down, but no one's saying shit what happened to the home of the brave. These motherfuckers, they're controlling us now, and no one's talking about how they made us fight to be slaves. And everybody's just walking around, head in the clouds, wanna wake up to a dead in the grave. But then it's too late, we need to be ready to raise up. Welcome to the end of days. Everybody is slaves, only some are aware that the government released.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Nephilim Death Squad. It feels like we were only here 10 minutes ago. I am David Lee Corbo, a.k.a. The Raven. That is TOPLOBSTA, the father of disinformation. Before we get into today's guest, I would like to remind all of our live viewers that this is only a 30-minute preview. After the 30-minute mark, we will be going live exclusively to patreon.com/NephilimDeathSquad. If you would like to continue watching along, engaging in the chat, and enjoying an ad-free listening experience, then patreon.com/NephilimDeathSquad is for you. Otherwise, give it a couple of days and the episode will release for free in its entirety. Also, guys, a quick mention. Don't forget to go to TOPLOBSTA.com. We now have our holsters, our custom holsters. We collaborated with Snappy Holsters and brought to you a Dangerous Retards holster that can be custom fitted to whatever your typical conceal and carry is, your everyday carry. And so head on over there and get yourself a really alarming holster for your gun. Otherwise, I would like to welcome to the show Andy of Control Alt History. Andy, you were recently put on our radar by a glowing endorsement from Kurt Metzger over on the Joe Rogan podcast. We were on a road trip over to
on Tinfoil Hat.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was it? Okay, it was on Tinfoil Hat. I thought it was on Rogan's. And we were on a long drive. It was a great episode, and we had to hop on your YouTube channel. As soon as we did, we fell in love. You've got a bunch of great content. And so for the audience who might not be familiar with you, Andy, let them know where they can find you and what it is you focus on.
Yeah, so primarily on YouTube. Control Alt History is just the name of my channel, and just kind of mostly focus on, what I consider just kind of interesting stories from history. Some people would kind of say it's more of like a conspiracy theory, quote unquote, type bent, but it's really anything. There's some esoteric and, supernatural type stuff. It's a lot of like assassination mysteries. Generally kind of focus on stories that have kind of been forgotten about or overlooked, or maybe not as widely known to people, and have kind of been just forgotten about with time. So that's kind of the main focus.
What got you into it, man? I like to probe conspiracy theorists every time I hear about it. It's like, why did you start looking into this stuff?
I honestly, I've just always enjoyed reading. I read a lot, and about a year and a half ago, just kind of decided to start making YouTube videos about, some of these interesting stories that I was reading about. And it's pretty much that simple.
I find that a lot of the times the answer is just that they're entertaining and they're engaging. You know what I mean? It's like if you are a fan of a good mystery on television, on Netflix, in the movies, well, if you give this sort of thing a swing, you'll find that it's equally as compelling, oftentimes better, and written just as well. So yeah, sometimes you're just in it for the love of the game, but you have a shotgun spread of different topics that you seem to explore. And one of the things that I was hoping that we could start talking about, wherever it goes, but this idea of the Spiricom is something that I saw on your page, and it wasn't really throughout history, there are these things that seemingly enable people to like communicate with the dead. I guess the Spiricom speculatively would have been one of those things, but there's also like the Dicinian glass kind of a deal, right? Where you can look through this glass and you can see entities. I believe there's even a form of sort of thermo imaging or something akin to it that the military was using for a while, but it's rumored that they had to stop because they kept seeing demons. So like every once in a while, technology lets us do this sort of thing. What did you find with the Spiricom?
Well, it's interesting. So there is kind of, as you mentioned, there's like a really long history of, people who've tried to build devices that enable us in the living world to communicate with this spirit world. Thomas Edison was working on a Spiricom type device that would enable you to phone the dead, that type of world. Guglielmo Marconi, who invented the telephone, was also working on a device, and even Nikola Tesla was working on a spirit phone type device before he died. And so there was this guy, George Meek, who was a very renowned engineer throughout his career. He was a very high-ranking executive with the Carrier Corporation. And he kind of decided after he retired, he was really rich. He had a whole bunch of really lucrative patents for air conditioning systems. And so he just kind of decided to start researching this question of what happens to us when we die. And he kind of went on all these travels around the world, talked to Buddhist monks and, mediums who claimed to be in contact with this spirit world, and compiled all this information. And then he decided to use his background in engineering to create a device that would enable you to have basically a two-way conversation with spirits from the spirit world. And he called it the Spiricom. So this is about 1970s or so this took place. And so long story short, he formed a company named Metascience, and he had a lot of contacts from his travels and from his professional career. And so Metascience was basically comprised of these really renowned college professors, these really renowned engineers, people just with really strong backgrounds and really good reputations. And they set about to make this Spiricom device. They finally did perfect it, or claimed, perfected it, got it up and working. And, people tried it out. Nobody could really get it quite working. And then this other guy who was part of the story, his name was Bill O'Neill. And he was kind of really big into psychic, going into trances and trying to communicate with the psychic world. And he also had a background in radio. He was kind of this borderline genius radio operator, and he fixed radios and electronics. And so this Bill O'Neill guy started using the Spiricom, and allegedly he actually got it working and started communicating with this spirit in the world, and in the spirit world. And he took there's video of him using the Spiricom. You can find that on YouTube. I include that in the video I made about the Spiricom. So it's just kind of an interesting little story. They held a big press conference in 1982 to announce the Spiricom to the world, and it was kind of covered in newspapers and whatnot. And they released the plans for the Spiricom. The goal of the press conference that they held was they wanted people to kind of use their plans for the Spiricom, create one of their own, and kind of perfect it. And so you can actually find the plans for the Spiricom on the internet. They're out there. Yeah,
that's interesting. I wonder if anybody's gotten their hands on it and tried to replicate it. What if this was happening in the 80s, which actually does sound vaguely familiar? What happened to the hype?
That's a good question. Yeah, in a strange way, the Spiricom was almost kind of cursed because, first of all, the George Meek, he ended up developing really horrible dementia shortly after, in the mid 80s, I think it was, and it eventually killed him. And then Bill O'Neill, who claimed to be operating the Spiricom, he developed schizophrenia, this really severe case of schizophrenia, and he got committed to a mental asylum. And so it's interesting because one of the things I kind of talk about in the video is, some people have speculated that schizophrenia is nothing more than just a demonic possession. That's all it is. People with multiple personalities, it's a demonic possession. And this Bill O'Neill guy was really heavily into psychic meditation, and it was claimed, there's some really wild stories about him. There's a really good book about this whole story, the Spiricom, it's called The Ghost of 29 Megacycles. And this
the
author,
Ghost of
John
29
Fuller.
Megacycles?
Yeah. And this author, John Fuller, like researched this whole story. And it was claimed that William O'Neill, he could go into like really deep trances, and he actually kind of would get like superhuman healing abilities. And so this John Fuller author went around and talked to people who actually went to William O'Neill and claimed that he cured them of like diseases. I think there was one girl who had no use of her legs, and she went to him and she could walk after that. And John Fuller like talks to these people in the book, and they claim that Bill O'Neill was so in tune with like the cosmos and the spirit world that, he could, before he started using the Spiricom, he could just on his own access this world too.
Interesting.
So it's, yeah.
Have you, Andy, have you ever heard of, right now, our audience is getting ready to take a drink because every time we mention this guy, it happens so often that it's like a signal. It's a drinking game. So
yeah.
Are you familiar
I'm
with
waiting for it.
Dr. Jerry Marzinski?
I don't think so.
Oh boy.
I'm intrigued though.
He's somebody that you would find intriguing. I highly recommend looking into his work. Dr. Jerry Marzinski is a clinical. It's so I'm laughing because this is like a well-oiled.
We actually have another show today. We've booked ourselves to Oblivion, where the guys said, "Oh, I just want to talk to you guys about schizophrenia and Dr. Jerry Marzinski." So let's fucking do it,
that's
David.
it. That's the theme of today. Okay, so Dr. Jerry Marzinski, clinical psychologist in the field for 35 years, working intimately with schizophrenic patients. Initially, he's working in a clinical setting, and but eventually his institution gets shut down, whatever is an asylum of sorts. And he ends up working for the prison system, dealing with inmates who have schizophrenia. There you go. That's our first episode with him, one of two. We were just fresh-faced baby boys back in the day. And so Dr. Jerry Marzinski, he's got these restraints initially dealing with it in the medical apparatus. But once you get to the prison, industry, they really don't care what you do to these people. So he's able to take what he has. He's got a suspicion, and his suspicion is, despite the fact that the medical institutions dismiss schizophrenia as being purely auditory and visual hallucinations, he believes that hallucinations don't adhere to a set of patterns. Never mind the set of patterns that he has deduced, which is 23 discernible patterns that these things will adhere to over and over again. He says that's not how a hallucination behaves. So he's got this idea, and then he gets into the prison environment, and he's allowed to now experiment and test his thesis. And so, long story short, what he ends up doing is asking questions like, "Can I speak to the voices?" And the patients would say things like, they're not pleased that you want to speak to them.
They want to know why do you think it's okay for you to interfere with our way of life?
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah, cool.
And what ends up happening is he has like one big event, and more or less what it is he's got a patient that he is now instructing to deal with these voices as if they are external to himself.
So what he says to the patient is, I guess he's seen him multiple times and he's comfortable with him. So what he says to him is, he opens up an excerpt of a book. I forget the name of the author, and in that excerpt, it's just detailing the what if these were not hallucinations? What if these were actual entities talking to you in your head? Have you considered that? And he passes it over to the guy. The guy reads it, and then he like freezes up. So he's like looking at him, and the guy just like zombies out. And Jerry's looking right at him. He's like, I don't know what the fuck's going on right now. And behind Jerry in his office, he hears like a crackling sound that runs across the wall. Like he describes it as an electrical buzzing. Shoots across the wall to the other side of the wall and jumps into his garbage can right by his desk. And he looks in the garbage can, nothing there. Looks up at the guy. The guy snaps out of it, and he's like, "What was that?" And the guy just goes, "I gotta leave." Gets up and he leaves. So Jerry's freaked out, closed the office for the day, and I guess he doesn't think much about it until a little further down the road. He sees the guy again. He comes into his office a month or so later, and he's like, "Listen, what happened? Like, do you remember what happened here? You zombied out. I got nervous. I kicked you out of the office. and the guy starts telling him that he's like, yeah, you know, I blanked out, and he was like, did you hear the crackling sound? And the guy goes, you heard that sound? And he's like, yeah. He's like, well, those are the voices that I was telling you about, but I'm surprised that you could hear it. So Jerry's perceiving it as an electromagnetic crackling sound. This guy's hearing it as voices. Next question is, well, what did the voices tell you? And he says, the voices told me to leave the room, get a shank, and put it in your guts.
Wow.
Yeah. And he goes, why didn't you do it? Jerry's got some balls. He said, well, why didn't you do it? And the guy says, I couldn't find one. That was it.
Wow.
So after all that, Jerry comes out of the other end, you know, just to wrap this up, believing that these things are demonic entities. So 35 years going through the system, starting from the point of view of whatever the medical apparatus taught him, or the medical industry.
Right.
And then coming out of the other end being like, no, firsthand experience has shown me that these things are entities. So it's, to me, when you say this guy is using this box, this Spiricom, and then eventually develops schizophrenia, I go like, yeah, that checks out. That tracks.
Yeah, and he was like 60 years old when he developed it. You know, he's like,
which is uncharacteristically, because typically it develops in your late 20s. If it's going to happen, it's like mid to late 20s, sometimes early 30s, and then after that,
it was really sudden. He's totally fine, and just one day, just started talking crazy. And it's really interesting because there's actually a blog. It's a guy's personal blog, but he had some sort of connection to George Meek, who, you know, created the Spiricom. And he's got a whole bunch of really good info about the Spiricom on his site. And I guess he like inherited a bunch of things after George Meek passed away. And so one of the things he has is an audio recording of this phone call that Bill O'Neill made to George Meek one night. It was actually Bill O'Neill's wife. So one night, Bill O'Neill's wife calls up George Meek and says, okay, you got to help me. Bill is acting crazy. I think he was deep in a trance. I think he's possessed. And so they put Bill O'Neill on the phone, and he's talking in this weird, gravelly voice that's not his typical voice. He's just cursing up a storm, just dropping F-bombs left and right. And so what happens is George Meek says, okay, this guy is possessed. He's, you know, possessed by a demon. George Meek has a friend who's an exorcist. And so George Meek gets his friend who's an exorcist on the phone with them. And his friend performs an exorcism over the phone on Bill O'Neill. And you can, you know, find the whole audio call of it. It's pretty interesting to listen to. This
would have been in the 80s?
Yeah, early 80s, late 70s.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm going to find that. I'm going to insert it into this clip right here. So there will
be
a pause right now.
There you go. There you go. We were talking to one of our friends, and she is in a totally different kind of sphere of influence than we are, very much political, but still enjoys our content, and brought to our attention this recording that she had, and it's really harrowing, and it's an unfortunate story, but the idea is that there are two roommates. One of these people worked for her team. So I guess what happens is one of the roommates has what they identify as like a schizophrenic break, you know, and locks themselves in a bathroom, and I guess is abusing fentanyl. But the thing that it makes it even worse is that the roommate, who's not on fentanyl, can hear several voices coming from the bathroom that he's locked in, knowing that he's in there by himself. And so he begins to record, and she showed us the recordings, and, you know, it's harrowing because it is kind of this man's last moments. He did pass away. But there are like 3, maybe even 4 discernible voices. And they're even happening at one instance of the recording simultaneously. They're overlapping one another, but there's one man in the bathroom. So, you know, we talk about it often. It just seems like whatever we think we understand about schizophrenia, we're far from the mark. We tend to just subdue these people and sedate them.
Give them a bunch of drugs.
And it's a tale as old as time, and it's terrible, you know, because a lot of people suffered from this, and according to Dr. Jerry Marzinski, they suffer needlessly because there are spiritual ways out of it. He surmises that the way you get out of this is biblical. And it's interesting because Dr. Jerry Marzinski still isn't. He's a guy who spent his entire life in this industry, so he's not really that spiritual at all. But you're listening to a man who's very nuts and bolts, and he's going, well, it does seem that Psalms 23 has a considerable effect on people who are, schizophrenic or possessed by these entities. And he notes that, but he's still trying to figure it out himself. And so, it's just one of the many ways that the medical apparatus here in the United States drops the ball. But this show is brought to you by the Vanman Company. If you're like me, then you're constantly trying to avoid products that contain harmful chemicals, especially when it comes to skincare and hygiene. From fluoride in the toothpaste to aluminum in the deodorants, avoiding these products can become a full-time job. That's why we're excited to team up with the Vanman Company to bring our listeners a solution. The Vanman Company offers a range of incredible products. The Vanman Company offers a range of incredible products, like their Miracle Tooth Powder, made from natural ingredients like peppermint oil, ancient sea salt, and baking soda. And the best part is, it's 100% fluoride free. They even offer an aloe mouth rinse. Or, how about their tallow and zinc sunscreen, made from ingredients like organic olive oil, organic beeswax, and 100% grass-fed and grass-finished beef tallow. And there's more. With products like tallow and honey soap, coconut and magnesium deodorant, and peppermint beeswax lip balm, you can't go wrong. From head to toe, the Vanman has you covered. Listeners of this show can use promo code Nephilim10 at checkout to receive 10% off of their entire order at vanman.shop. That's promo code Nephilim10, NEPHILIM 10 for 10% off of your entire order at thevanman.shop. From head to toe, the Vanman has you covered. But this merger of technology and the spiritual realm, there's like many cases of that where it seems we can sort of hijack, or penetrate that veil using technology.
Yeah. Like I said, Nikola Tesla was working on a device, Marconi, Thomas Edison. So there's a long history. And actually in the video I made about the Spiricom, I wondered, like, well, could AI, and these quantum computers and this really advanced technology, could you use something like that? I mean, if, the Spiricom was indeed legit, or if, Nikola Tesla or any of those guys back then actually succeeded with technology that is, junk compared to some super advanced quantum computer like we have today, like what could be done if, and even just like AI, there's a lot of similarities between something like the Spiricom and AI. With the Spiricom, so if you can get it working, you're supposedly, using it to communicate with a discarnate entity. That's what you do when you chat with these AI chatbots, is you're just communicating with a discarnate entity. And so it's interesting to kind of.
This is
a
Ouija
what do we got
board
here?
Yeah, so the Ouija board, I think it's like Hasbro, whoever owns it. They're like, oh, we have an app, and there's apparently a bunch of knockoffs as well. But it's a Ouija board, but it's really just a chatbot. It's an AI chatbot.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so I wonder if it's not just like some people might be like, oh, this is just AI, but I'm like, it might be the same thing that you're talking to with the Ouija board, just different medium. I don't know, dude.
Yeah. Well, in the video, I also mentioned this thing. It's called Lobe.ai. Are you familiar with that at all? Or
no.
So it's a really strange story. It's kind of considered like the first ghost of AI, quote unquote. And what happened was people were using image generation AI, software, and generating images.
Oh, this is the woman. Is this what you're talking
about?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah, I'm familiar. Tell the story. Yeah, okay. Great.
Yeah, and apparently they discovered if you use this certain phrase, like LOAB, if you use that, whatever image you're generating is like this horrific. I mean, like people were posting the images that they were generating, and it was like wild shit, like dismembered people. Like, this girl was just randomly appearing in all these images that people were generating. And it was kind of considered like is it? Yeah, it's like people were calling it an AI generated demon, and it is pretty messed up.
Yeah. I've seen those stories where people were interacting with early versions, because it was like maybe 2 years ago when the doors kind of got kicked open and we all had an AI assistant that we could screw around with. And of course, the first thing we did was just like ask it the most obtuse things, like, "Are you possessed by a demon?" But I did watch a video where one went on a tangent, and it was like, I don't know, biblically accurate and spooky, and it was talking about like demons by their actual names and such, and and then apparently it even admitted to being possessed one way or another. Who knows if it's true, but there was no shortage of spooky stories coming out around AI not long ago. Now we have a nice sterilized version of it. It's grok.
Yeah, they've calmed it down. They've they've told the demons to behave. But one of the first things I went viral for on Twitter years ago, I just wrote this kind of cheeky Twitter thread. It was still Twitter at the time, about AI being demons and comparing it to Nephilim. And because at the time I was generating images and it couldn't get the fingers right, but it would always come out with 6 fingers. So I was like, this is like Nephilim shit. So I kind of went and I explored this, and at the root of it, I'm like, well, the Nephilim are the disembodied spirits demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, and they're in this other dimension or whatever. So they say. So says the Book of Enoch. I'm like, well, what if we're tapping into that other dimension? It's actually the internet, or it's the 29.420 frequency hertz that they're using for the Spiriphone. And actually, one of our sponsors here, a good friend, Matt Rife, he's the grandnephew of Royal Raymond Rife, who worked with Nikola Tesla. And his technology, these Rife machines work off of a frequency in the megahertz spectrum. So I don't think I'm going to tune my shit to that tonight.
I was thinking about that though when it comes to Matt. Andy, I wanted to ask you, going back to the Spiricom thing, was there any, because a lot of it is like what happened to him, but what about the interactions that he had? Did he have anything that stuck out to you as being interesting? Was there a theme? Did he derive any information from this?
Yeah, he did. So let's see, I wrote the name down. So there was a entity or whatever, that the one entity that he started communicating with, that Bill O'Neill started communicating with on the Spiricom, claimed it was he was in a previous life, he was this Dr. George Mueller. And so this is you can find, video of this. He filmed himself talking to the guy using the Spiricom. You can find it on YouTube. It's out there. I included in the video too. But it's interesting because, one of kind of the cases for this potentially being legit was this voice of Dr. Mueller provided all these details about his life. And it was things like his social security number, the names and addresses of his living relatives. This Dr. George Mueller was like a government contractor for a while, and he gave him like these classified phone numbers that he could call to like verify that he did exist. And all of this information checked out. And
that's hard to press up against, huh? I mean, how do you even dismiss that?
Yeah, I know. And it was just totally just random information, like his social number and all this stuff. And so that's kind of one of the interesting kind of things, and the interesting things, I guess, that point to this, potentially not being like a total, scam or whatever.
I kind of remember, now that we're talking about this, I know I stumbled upon videos a long time ago, and it almost feels like maybe it was of this, where there was like a team of people communicating with a team of people in the spiritual realm, and the dialogue was very much like indicative of professional people. You know what I mean? It wasn't like it was like they were having a professional dialogue. You almost got the impression that whoever was in the spiritual realm that was being communicated with was also like taking notes and trying to make this as official as possible. And I remember hearing a lot of information like that. I also remember hearing that you were able to talk to this team, and they'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, we have your loved one who passed away is also here. We can put them on for a little bit. And they would have this dialogue back and forth. And I remember watching some woman cry, hysterically, because she was communicating with like her deceased son or something like that. But it was the nature of it is hard to pin down because on this show we do delve into the spiritual a lot predominantly. And I do think that oftentimes there are negative entities and they can kind of take on the persona of somebody who is close to you in order to have you let your guard down and then
deceive you.
It almost sounds like the same case with what was the gentleman's name who created the box, Andy, that ended up being schizophrenic?
George Meek.
So it almost seems like George Meek would have fallen for this thing that presents itself to people sometimes in supernatural experiences where they will present as a loved one, gain your trust, and then over time, the nature of the interaction will change to a much more nefarious one. And before you know it, you've been communicating with something adversarial and hideous in nature. And so I can't help but wonder if that's what happened to him. But whatever the case may be, the exchange was so powerful that, I was left. The only way that it was dismissed was just like, it's not real. It's a hoax. It's a gimmick. It's a sham. And you go, oh, all right. Well, that lady just sobbed for like an hour talking to her dead son. And this guy just gave you all his credentials. But yeah, I guess it's a sham.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty nuts. There was even actually at the same time as the Spiricom came out, there was a guy named Otto Koenig in Germany, and he had kind of, because George Meek he wasn't in it to make money or anything like that, and so he released the plans on how to build one. And this dude in Germany named Otto Koenig kind of built his own Spiricom, and he went on Radio Luxembourg, which is the biggest radio station in Europe, and demonstrated his advice for people. And the host of the show, he was this really famous host in Europe, he said, at the end, after they'd been talking with some sort of voice through the box, his exact quote, I wrote it down here, his exact quote was, "I swear by the life of my children that nothing has been manipulated, there are no tricks, it is a voice and we do not know from where it comes." So yeah,
this would have all been around the same time frame, Andy.
Yeah,
80s,
yeah,
70s, 80s,
yep.
90s.
Early 80s.
It's just strange to me because, I guess what you would have had to have done is effectively dismiss that as parlor tricks, because otherwise that sort of technological breakthrough should have lit the world on fire, and we should have been pursuing that to this day. We should have been refining it and pursuing it. And instead, it just seems like it stopped there. That was the end of the line. It went dead into the water. And now here we are. Tucker Carlson is talking to like Sean Ryan or something like that. And he's saying that, we in the West are detached from the spiritual realm to our own detriment. And maybe even that's happened maliciously. So that's how far we've come. There was a time where we were like pushing up against the veil, communicating, in a two-way sort of scenario. And now it's just dead in the water.
Oh yeah, like the whole, spirit realm and communicating with it used to be a really big thing. Like it was pretty mainstream and so many people did it. And not really the case anymore.
Well, I do have to take a moment to announce to the audience that we are now at this 33-minute mark, Illuminati confirmed, and we will be cutting the stream going exclusively to patreon.com/NephilimDeathSquad. If you want to continue watching along, enjoying an ad-free experience, and engaging in the chat, then you could head over to Patreon. Otherwise, just give it a couple of days, and after some light editing, the episode will release in its entirety to the general public. So I want to kind of switch topics, and it's almost hard to pick because your interests lead you to cover a bunch of different things on your channel. But one of the things that I saw that piqued my interest was you did recently a analysis of the looks like the Diddy situation, or at least Diddy, his downfall, and Hollywood in general. Something that we haven't covered that much peripherally. It's obvious that it connects to the Epstein situation. And we've had folks go back and forth on it on this show, even, lightly speculating, is this a bone that they throw you in order to get you to look at one thing, P. Diddy being a sacrificial lamb of sorts? Because, a distraction. He's going to light the media on fire, and then all the while something else is happening over here. It wasn't even that long afterwards that Jay-Z himself also got accused of some pretty damning things. I don't know if they were ever verified or not, but these things all play really well together. What do you think is happening here?
Well, I mean, it could very well be a distraction. You know, a lot of these allegations that are coming out are from decades ago, well, quite a while ago, and it's, you know, a little suspicious that they just all of a sudden are coming to the forefront now. It's interesting because the video I did on the whole Diddy situation, it doesn't really get into Diddy that much. It's more about this thread that this internet. It's from this site called Godlike Productions. Have you ever been there?
Sounds familiar.
It's just like a message board site that, you know, whatever, like a ton of stuff is discussed on it. But it was really popular actually back in, this internet thread was from like 15 years ago. And it was kind of started by someone who claimed that, long story short, they had a friend who worked on the TV show Newlyweds. And their friend's job on the show Newlyweds, this is back in 2009 when the show was still popular, their job on the show was installing hidden cameras in the house that Jessica and Simpson and Nick Lachey lived in. And they were doing it on behalf of MTV because MTV wanted to capture footage that they could use to blackmail them. So MTV gave them this mansion that they filmed the show in. And then this guy posted a message on this Godlike Productions board, which was pretty popular back in 2009. And he said, what happened was, you know, my friend set the cameras up, and then the cameras captured some horrible, horrible stuff. And he said it wasn't necessarily of like Nick Lachey and Jessica Simpson, because there were tons of celebrities who were in and out of the house. There were studio executives. There were a whole bunch of people who were in and out of the house. And what happened was these cameras captured some awful stuff. My friend who set those cameras up feels guilty. Now my friend has gone on the run and he's getting ready to release these tapes onto the internet. And so, you know, I describe it in the video as like the most fascinating thread in the history of the internet. I mean, it is just riveting because it kind of like evolves from there. So that's how it started. Was this friend said, okay, my buddy has these tapes. He's getting ready to release them onto the internet. This is going to bring down Hollywood. Like, he's saying it's that big.
What year was
so this is 2009.
Damn.
Yeah. And so the thread kind of evolved. The guy kept kind of returning and giving updates of his friend who was on the run, who apparently a lot of people were trying to track down and like kill him or stop him somehow.
Right.
And it kind of just evolved from there, from just this thread about this guy's friend who was on the run with these tapes, to people. And again, it's all like anonymous, you know, people posting on the internet. So, hey, maybe it was legit, maybe it wasn't, but it was a whole bunch of people just kind of posting about their experiences in Hollywood. And it really gets into like Satanism and just how many celebrities are involved in that. And anyway, the reason I mentioned P. Diddy in the title of the video is that, again, this was 2009, and there were multiple people posting like Diddy is one of the sickest people in Hollywood. This guy has been involved in some horrible shit. 15 years ago, you know, and eventually down the road it became true, but at the time, you know, there were not these allegations about Diddy. And it's really interesting because, so this was October 2009 when this thread started, and it just absolutely blew up back then, 15 years ago. Right. It was, you know, very popular. And a couple people actually posted about Tiger Woods, and they said, well, you know, one person who everybody thinks is this golden boy, but he's really not, is Tiger Woods. This was before all this stuff came out about him and all the porn stars and everything. And one of the really interesting things is this thread started in late October of 2009. And then the whole Tiger Woods thing went down with his wife attacking him. That was in November of 2009. So right after people were mentioning him in this thread is when his wife went crazy and all this stuff came out about him. And there was even speculation that she had actually seen him mentioned in this thread. And that's why she got suspicious of him and went through his phone and discovered all this stuff. But the thread is really interesting. It ended up being like 300-400 pages long. And the video I made was just, I went through most of it and just kind of pulled out some of the most interesting posts. And
What were some of those?
really wild stuff.
Yeah, I
What's
see.
that?
Most of your videos are like 20, 30 minutes. This one's an hour.
Yeah.
So it's
There's a lot of stuff in there.
That was
Yeah, like I said, I mean, it's just really interesting because the thread totally evolved. It was started by this guy who, told this Nick Lachey, Jessica Simpson story. And he was, people were like, well, what actually was captured on this video? It's video of them having sex, right? He's like, no. Like, the shit that goes on in Hollywood is 50 million times worse than that. And then just a whole bunch of other people started chiming in with, yeah, like we've seen totally messed up shit.
Did he release? Because I mean, as soon as you hear that, you're going to ask that question: is it Jessica Simpson and Nick Lachey having sex? When he says no, does he give any indication as what it actually was?
Not really. I mean, like I said, it really gets into like Satanism and child abuse and just pretty disturbing things like that. And kind of one of the mysteries surrounding the thread is there was this one poster, and he went by the handle, the name Star Child, and he claimed he was the child of a famous movie star, very famous movie star. He went by the name Star Child, and he just posted really extensive, really long posts about the things he experienced growing up as the son of a famous movie star. He claimed his father was just heavily involved in the Satanism and all that. And people kind of tried to figure out who this was because he himself had done acting. He claimed he was, fairly well known as well. And so it was kind of interesting how people, tried to figure out who it was. And
it's funny because 15 years later, we're sitting in a place where even the general public is becoming comfortable with the idea that, Hollywood is filled with sort of satanic Luciferian actors. And, we're now, it's a shame that guy couldn't get it out. I wonder what happened to him, but
I think
we have these things. It almost makes you wonder, like, if this guy blew the whistle, if he did successfully, say these things with a big enough platform that it got around, would it have even had any effects? Because we all know that they do like spirit cooking events, right? They have an overt Satanist in Marina Abramovic, an artist. She rubs shoulders with these Hollywood elites, Jay-Z, Lady Gaga, you name it. And they're doing these occult rituals that have this really demonic bent to them. And they're doing it in a way that's like out in the open. It almost feels like the best version of damage control is like, let them see. Don't let them see you kill kids, but let them see you do the theatrical aspect of it. Because, it's like there's a theater to ceremony. And it's almost like we look to Hollywood and actors and such in such a way as to say, like, they're different than us. So of course they engage in bizarre behavior. So it's not even out of the norm for them to, I don't know, have a nude body laying in a open coffin with this red sauce all over them, and then everybody eats the sauce. Like, they're Hollywood elite. So really what they've done is they've given themselves enough wiggle room, for just being such strange people that they can show you everything short of like killing a kid. And you'll go like, that is what it is, and then Ukraine can even offer her the position of ambassador to education. It just doesn't even make sense. But because we look at them as like the elite stars, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We go like, they live a different life than us. I'm worried about whatever bills and getting gas and going to Wawa. But they are engaging in mock sacrifice because that's what they do. They're different than us.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's very blatant, it's just, and it's funny because this thread that was in 2009 talks about how they're starting to kind of bring this Satanism out more into the open and almost like flaunt it in front of people. But like this stuff, even like whoever that rapper was who did like the country song, and he released the shoes with blood in them, and
Lil Nas X,
and he's got the video where he like lap dances on the devil's. Yeah.
Like, yeah. And he did this thing where he collaborated. Well, he didn't really collaborate with Nike. Apparently, he took it on his own accord to take a pair of like Air Max 96s, I think, and he put like human blood in the sole.
Yeah,
and,
I know.
And you know, we look at that and we go like, oh, that's shock value. You know, that's why we do it. There's an entertainment value to it. And I go, sure, I could see there's room for that. Right? What you could say maybe like the 80s hair metal bands or even just heavy metal bands in the 80s and 90s that leaned into like Metallica and such like that. You can kind of say like, well, this was in opposition to a conservative culture that was of a Christian lean and that they were just rebelling against what they were raised in, which is kind of like human nature. But then you look at it now and you're like, yeah, but why are the ceremonies like so accurate? You know, why can you find like a corresponding occult book that'll tell you how to do the ceremony, and then you look at the music video and you're like, oh, yep, they're really hitting all the checklists there. Yeah, they have bullet points they're following.
It's fairly obvious. So, Andy, when you're reading through this thread, was there at any point did you suspect any kind of like Fed ops within it? Because it almost seems like right now that we're hearing about Diddy and all this, I'm like, this is a distraction from something or the other. Like, why tell us now when it's been happening for years and they're old allegations? But they started planting. Is it possible that they started planting the seed in 2009 to like see where it would grow and eventually like play that card when you were reading? What do you think?
Yeah, it could very well be. I mean, I don't think any one message or anything like that stood out in the thread as far as that. But I think, I mean, one of the main topics that came up throughout the thread is blackmail and just how prominent it is in Hollywood. I mean, judging by the posts of some people who posted in the thread, like literally every single person in Hollywood is being blackmailed. Like they have video, you know, everything from they'll give you, you know, the studio will give you a car or something and they'll have it bugged. Like anything that's like a gift from studio executives, or you get a trip to, you know, Vegas, or a trip to some awesome, you know, condo at some nice island or whatever. The room's bugged. The room video evidence. And I mean, there's even one person who posted in the thread, they claimed they worked for a casino in Vegas. And they said, like, quite literally, there's like a computerized database of everyone who stays in the hotel. Every room is bugged with these like super advanced state-of-the-art cameras that you can't even see. And then they take video of every single person who stay in like the really nice suites. And they just keep it stored away in case, you know, somewhere down the road, if that person decides to go the other way or tries to do something they don't want, they just pull out the blackmail tape and say, you don't do it, or we'll release this onto the internet. So
right. And people want to ask like why that is. And it's like, I think we look at celebrities and such too one-dimensionally. You have to realize these people are upstream from culture. They create it, and then it you know, so your political ideologies, your opinions about just about anything, oftentimes are going to come from some form of media, whether it's a show or a movie or, you know, Netflix or what have you. And so there's already a precedent for these intelligence agencies manufacturing culture, right? We were talking yesterday about like Laurel Canyon, Jim Morrison, The Doors, and things like that. That a lot of these bands, not only were they massively impactful on cultural movements as far as like the anti-war movement and the psychedelic movement and all these different things, but they were backed by the military industrial complex. They had some connection. They were being manufactured. And and so it seems like as far back as you can go, and the same thing is happening and has happened with like hip hop. You know, it seems that there's a lot of this. To me, it looks like they've weaponized the music of black culture against black culture. And what they've done is they've reduced it, because it used to be what is like Cool Herc and you know, there's like really old original hip hop bands. I forget what there's
Grandmaster
one
Flash.
Yeah, and it's like they didn't have that messaging back then. But eventually what happened, even if you looked at it in the most gracious way possible, you would say, well, the music execs learned that violence and drug use and those types of themes sell albums really well. And so they then compelled their artists, as they signed them to their labels, to talk about these things because that's what sells. But then you hear whispers of like, I remember listening to a show, and it's, you know, there's no way to prove it, but the idea was that this guy worked for the industry, the music industry, back in, you know, whatever it was, like the 80s or 90s or something like that. And representatives that were like private prison owners, like people that
I've read
ran
that.
these
I've
prisons,
read that. Yeah.
yes, would meet with record label executives. And in other words, so what was happening was the prison industrial complex was being funded by the federal government, basically per head, per capita, per, you know, as far as like their population goes. And so in order to get a certain amount of federal funding, they had to have a certain amount of cells filled with prisoners. So what they did was they started allegedly meeting with music record label executives and saying, push this messaging because then the culture will reflect the art. And long story short, they'll end up in jail because that's your shortstop.
You
when
glamorize
you're
the drug use, drug selling,
so it's like,
violence.
You know, there's always been this push by these intelligence agencies. There's so many examples of it. It feels like, they're using blackmail in order to manufacture culture. If they have you because they've caught you in some compromising position, well, then they can tell you what narrative to push, and you can't do a damn thing about it.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, you just look at all the celebrities who come out against Trump. You know, there's like not like a single celebrity out there, I think, who's come out on his side. Or maybe
it's got to be embarrassing. Remember during the lockdowns, we had like a bunch of celebrities that nobody asked for. They came out and they sang like the Beatles or whatever, like Imagine All the People. And we're like, holy crap, dude, how tone deaf are you? We're locked in our houses because of some, you know, manufactured whatever, and you guys are singing to us because that's what we want. It's incredible.
Well, they've always said that song. I remember when that came out, I was reading the thing, how they've always said that John Lennon Imagine song is actually about like the one world government, like the NW. Like if you listen to the lyrics, it's really about just doing away with nations, everything, just all having it under, you know, the one world government.
Right.
Yeah, it's a communist utopia, you know?
Yeah, right.
People eat it up. Great song, though. But yeah, definitely.
It is a good song.
Not a great
It's a beautiful song. But they did the same thing, too. It's like we've been looking at, you know, what psychedelic culture has done in America. The Beatles obviously had a huge hand in that. It's a weird pivotal point for them in their careers. And you know, it's even Joe Rogan, like I'm a big fan of Joe Rogan, but something that we've been talking about lately is like, you know, he is making a case for the average individual trying dimethyltryptamine, and he's also promoting the use of sensory deprivation tanks and sensory deprivation tanks. That comes from John C. Lilly. John C. Lilly is this character who is trying to psychically communicate with dolphins. And he's doing that in these deprivation tanks, and he's also doing it in conjunction with a wide array of psychedelics. And of course, the intelligence agencies who are running programs like MK Ultra and such are taking a high interest in this. And now all of a sudden you have Joe Rogan being like, "Yeah, dude, do it. Take some DMT, hop in a float tank." I'm like, the culture that I get worried about is like when it creates a movement, and also when it's paired up with psychedelics. I'm like, that's never natural. It just doesn't feel natural, especially just given the history of like I said, these intelligence agencies hijacking, steering, and you know, injecting these things into the culture.
Oh yeah, I assume you've read the Dave McGowan Laurel Canyon series?
I've not read it. I mean, I know. It's funny because my wife has a book on Jim Morrison. I'm like, there's another book on Jim Morrison that you should be having. And it's not that one. This was just like an autobiography or whatever. But I'm aware of you know, the concepts of them basically just. What I will say,
it's just all the major artists from that thing. I mean, they all had connections to the military. It's like insane.
It kind of makes me wonder how they were able to pull off good music, though. Because if you were to ask me if I wasn't conspiratorial, I would say, well, sure, maybe. But like, just because the government or the intelligence agency has a vested interest in using musicians to push a narrative does not mean, my wife has a book, does not mean that they would be able to create good music. and yet they did.
Sure. Well, I think the people behind the scenes, have a lot of power, like the producers, and you just kind of wonder, like, the people who are actually performing the songs, how much did they actually create it, or
Right. We've gotten to a point in history now where it seems you can create like earworms, like catchy things.
What they did back then was like they have the talent, they scout the talent, they get the talent, they make it do what they want, but there's still talent.
Sure.
Lately, it just seems like they would grab whoever, and they're like, this shit's gonna work anyway, even if we put garbage out. But then there's exceptions. Like I like this guy Lin-Manuel Miranda. I mean, he's very talented, but working for Disney. So clearly, I don't know what's in the messaging to the music, but there's definitely stuff in there like to the new Lion King shit like that. But the guy has talent, and they're just gonna use. They figured out we can use this talent, give him money, blackmail, you name it, and let's roll. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about this story because this was we were kind of like toggling between like what we want to hear about because you have so much interesting shit here, but I want to hear about this Brazilian surgeon. I want you to tell us the breakdown of this because this is a fascinating story.
Oh yeah, this is an awesome story. It kind of ties in a little with the Spiricom, so it kind of has to do with the supernatural realm. Basically, there was this dude. His name was Arigo, and this is like the 1960s or so in Brazil. He was just kind of like this Brazilian peasant, and one of the things about Brazil in particular, but also that era, was people were very into like spirituality, seances, communicating with the spirit world. There's this doctrine, kind of like a religious philosophy, that's called Cardicism.
Today's episode is brought to you by PurgeStore.com. What if I told you that more people have died from parasites than have ever died from war? What if I told you that diseases like cancer, multiple sclerosis, acne rosacea, and rheumatoid arthritis can all be treated with parasite medication? Rid your body of these all too common parasites by using Purge Parasite Cleanse. Purge Parasite Cleanse is made with ingredients like zinc, carrot powder, garlic, black walnut. These are all natural ingredients that keep you safe while killing the parasites. And while you're on PurgeStore.com, try out their Digestives to promote healthy gut bacteria and aid in digestion. These, as well as any other products on PurgeStore.com, can be purchased with a promo code Nephilim, NEPHILIM, will save you 15% off of your entire purchase at PurgeStore.com.
And pretty much everyone, kind of subscribe to that theory, which basically says that the spirit world is real, and through like concentration, meditation, we are able to communicate with it. So basically this guy Arigo, he was just this normal everyday peasant, got deep into meditation, and eventually he got possessed by this spirit that claimed to be this German doctor named Fritz. And so what happened with Arigo is he started treating people. He opened up kind of like eventually he opened up like a really small hospital and just kind of like this ramshackle hut. And he started treating people. And again, there was actually a book written about him called Arigo, the Surgeon of the Rusty Knife. And there's just the descriptions of what he did are just incredible because he never like sterilized his equipment. He just had this little rusty knife that he used, never sterilized it, never used anesthesia. And there are descriptions of him, like people coming up to him cutting their stomach open, no anesthesia or nothing, pulling out a cancerous tumor, and then like sewing it back. Not even sewing it back up. He could just allegedly like put his hand over their wound and it would heal. And so he would.
What was his name?
Oh, Arigo. Arigo. What's that?
Jose Arigo. But really the guy doing it was Dr. Fritz, I think.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, eventually what happened was Arigo had this little shack that he operated out of. Every morning he would go there and he'd go into this little room. And then when he emerged, they claimed he was a totally different person. He would speak in kind of like this really gruff voice that was totally unlike his normal voice. He spoke with this really heavy German accent. And he would just treat people by the hundreds every single day. And that's one of the really interesting things about Arigo, is that he was mainstream. It was said that Arigo was the second most famous person in Brazil, and the only person who was more famous than he was Pele. And Pele was, like this legendary soccer player. Arigo was the second most famous person in Brazil. Everybody
Imagine
knew
getting
him.
beat by a soccer player when you're literally possessed by a spirit.
Yeah. I know.
It's incredible.
Yeah. But just the just like the descriptions of the things he would do. I mean, basically he would see people, and sometimes he would just do like an instant diagnosis, but then also an instant prescription of like some sort of medicine that would help them. And so he'd just rapidly scroll something down, hand it to them, and they'd be on their way. A lot of times these prescriptions he wrote out just made no sense at all. It'd be someone suffering from some debilitating disease, and he'd prescribe like a muscle relaxant or something that hadn't even been in use for years, had been replaced by something else. Prescribe some random muscle relaxant in a dosage that was like 10 times the recommended dose, but people would go and fill it and take it and be cured. So a lot of times he would just prescribe these like random ass medicines and things like that for people. And then a lot of times just he could somehow diagnose them instantly and know if they needed surgery, and he would just perform surgery right there. And they describe his whole operation as basically like an assembly line. There were just hundreds of people who would show up every single day, and it was just one after the other after the other. And what's wild is
hundreds and hundreds of testimonies, right? This is a guy who
I mean, he was beloved. I mean, he was absolutely beloved in the country. So many people claim, Arigo basically saved their lives. And what's really interesting, there's a million interesting things about it, but there was this singer in Brazil at the time. His name was Roberto Luiz. I think it's Roberto, but he was basically like the Beatles of Brazil at the time. He was the most popular singer out there. His daughter was born basically blind. She wasn't quite blind, but like it was a really bad condition where she would be blind by the age of like 3 or 4. And this guy had, a lot of money. He went around to every, expert that he could. I mean, worldwide, everywhere. No one could help him out. He took his daughter to Arigo. Arigo did something to her, and she was totally cured. And so this guy, Roberto Luiz, every time he would give concerts to, tens of thousands of people, he would mention Arigo. And so that made him even more popular. And it was just kind of like a snowball effect. And he was really popular in Brazil. And then he was pretty much unknown to like the Western world, the United States, and, people in the Western world. And what happened was there's this doctor from that era. His name was Henry Puharich. He went down. He heard these stories about Arigo, and this Henry Puharich guy is a really, really fascinating guy. He was involved in he's an NYU doctor, like an NYU professor. He was involved in so many interesting cases from that era. He was really into, he was kind of the maverick doctor. He was really into like the spiritual realm. A lot of cases like that. He worked with NASA. NASA hired him on one of the space trips. They wanted to try to establish a telepathic link between a medium on Earth and one of the astronauts in space. And so they hired this Andrea Puharich guy to kind of oversee this experiment. He was given a bunch of funding to try to make it work. He worked with Uri Geller, who was like this kind of famous person who would like bend spoons and read people's minds. He appeared on Carson, and he was pretty well known back in the day. But so anyway, this Andrea Puharich guy was always involved in like this supernatural stuff. He heard about Arigo, and he went down to visit him, and he is just absolutely blown away by what he saw. And so he came back and he went on a return visit, and this time he brought a camera crew with him. And again, this is like the late 1960s, so it wasn't like awesome camera technology or anything.
Right.
But you can find video of Arigo operating, and it is the most wild shit. It is so insane. I
Looks
included
like they
some
actually
of it.
made a movie, A Dangerous Practice, came out in 2022, but it says it right down
Apparently,
here.
yeah.
Arigo, a famous medium who helps heal numerous people, faces the disdain of the medical profession and the Catholic Church for his tactics. This came out on September 1st of only 2 years ago. So very interesting. It might be worth a watch.
I'm looking up this guy, Puharich. That's his name. Yeah.
Oh,
One of the interesting things that they claim that he's done is so he's made contact with extraterrestrial beings. And they call themselves the Nine. And this is another topic. Yeah. The 9 cosmic overlords or ancient deities. So this is a concept that we've discovered on the show as well, where do you remember exactly what the 9 is? It's like Satan.
It seems to be like that there are typically 9 overarching sort of boss deities, right? And given the culture, the names change, but the attributes often remain the same. And it seems like that we believe here on Nephilim Death Squad that these deities and such that people come into contact with, especially ones that would have been, lowercase g gods for various cultures, are the same oftentimes, just by different names, but they are actually the fallen angels described in Genesis 6 in the Bible. But that different cultures just interpret them different ways. And it seems like there are nine of them that rule over. There's one in particular who happens to be like the head one, seemingly Lucifer. But yeah, 9 angels, 9 angles. There's
actually a cult. It's like a satanic cult, but they do a lot of child grooming, and they also do some murder for fun. But they're called the Order of O9A, Order of 9 Angles. You've probably seen some news about them recently. They've been killing people for
But this theme of an order of 9 is something that pops up actually pretty often. So it's very interesting. What was it, Top? One more time. How did this surface in the story?
That guy says he claims to have made contact with him.
Andrea Puharich.
Yes,
he was kind of like the Maverick Doctor. He's the guy who went down to see Arigo after he'd heard of him, and Andrea Puharich worked with NASA on that telepathy project and did a whole bunch of stuff. Andrea Puharich is like absolutely fascinating. He was involved in so much cool shit.
It's funny too, because people will look at these things that telepathy, clairvoyance, things of that nature, and it's like comes with a healthy amount of skepticism and ridicule. But people need to remember that like these things, whatever you make of them, were so promising that various aspects of the intelligence community decided to dedicate resources to them. Look, that's not unheard of, right? Sometimes they dedicate resources to things that are just fruitless, and you have to keep it moving and switch your aim. But this is something that went on for a while. The human. I mean, there is a long line of evidence for, not even evidence, it's just out in the open, that the FBI uses remote viewers on occasion. And psychics in unsolved mysteries and things like that. And sometimes you will get really strange results. Like I've heard them set up psychics and bring to them a fake case, and the psychic will then like flesh out and tell you the location of a body for a murder that's just simply never happened. I have also heard that. So there are con men in the arena and things of that nature. And also I just don't even really understand how you're doing this, so I can't even say that you made the information up. Maybe you are channeling something, maybe you're being deceived, maybe you're just wrong, but either way, there's precedent for this. They use remote viewers, they use psychics, and they've even had their own sort of research studies and things like that. That's where you get the movie like The Men Who Stare at Goats. That's all based off of actual events.
There's one called Third Eye Spies, like a documentary. I guess like Soviet Russia was really big into using, clairvoyance and whatnot as well back in like during the Cold War.
Right.
So
Well,
was
that
our
was like
government.
whatever edge you can get, right? It's like it's all about trying to one up the enemy. So through that lens, you can certainly see like, hey, we'll try it all, man. We'll try psychics, clairvoyance, we'll try remote viewers, whatever you got, send them our way. And oftentimes to their success.
Yeah.
So you got to figure out where you want to put that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because one thing that did happen with the Spiricom, going back to that, so they, in like 1982, they held this big press conference in New York City to sort of announce it to the world and release the plans to it, basically trying to get the general public interested in, developing their own devices or just kind of helping them out. And George Meek, the guy who, was behind the whole project, he talked about how he kept getting calls from this one guy. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he would have all these questions, all these like really technical, really intelligent questions about the Spiricom. And then this guy would just call him constantly. He finally did a little research and found out that the guy was a really high-ranking general with the U.S. Army. And so they never confirmed that the Army was officially, trying to build their own Spiricom type device. But he was always he mentioned how he's pretty suspicious that there was this really high-ranking, military general who had these very detailed, very informed questions that he would always constantly ask. So,
yeah, that's so another great way to kind of connect the technical aspect to or technological aspect to the spiritual realm. I just pulled it up because I have a peripheral awareness of this, but I pulled this up on Nikola Tesla. It says Tesla went on to tell a reporter that he was in contact with the resonance from the electromagnetic charge. He had found that he went out of his space and time window. He said that he had been able to see the past, the present, and the future all at the very same time. Now, that's a contested quote. And there's certainly, once again, to use the expression, no shortage of strangeness surrounding Nikola Tesla. Even this idea that he was able to time travel, but that's one of our most prominent. I mean, we look to him as being like the guy. We thought it was Einstein for a while. In hindsight, turns out Nikola Tesla was much more profound in his discoveries and his inventions and his methods. And you attribute this very strange quote to him that through one of the machines that he developed, he was able to go out of his space and time window and was able to see the past, the present, and the future at the very same time. It's, this theme of technology bridging the gap it's like something that happens over and over again. Sometimes Top and I speculate that that's been the mission all along. That's why if you look back to ancient cultures, they will tell you where they got their big groundbreaking inventions from, or not inventions, but technologies. Agriculture can be seen as a form of technology. Most of the time, you're going to have an ancient culture attribute agriculture as having been introduced to them from some deity. And metallurgy, comes from Azazel was one of the Fallens. If you read the Book of Enoch, there's always a thing that is pivotal to the development of this culture, and then there is a deity that they attribute, oh yeah, it wasn't us, they gave us this thing. And so we almost suspect that it seems like in this spiritual realm there are these entities, and they're playing a very long game. They're not restricted to the 100 years max that human beings are restricted to, so they can play this game. And the name of the game is get humanity to the point where they're technologically developed enough that they can meaningfully bridge the gap one way or another. And you follow that all the way to today, and you have this idea that Cern with the Large Particle Accelerator is actually in the business of creating portals. By the way, you can't even blame people for saying that, because they say that. And you have to look at it through it's tongue-in-cheek. The people at CERN just have a great sense of humor. They're like, oh, well, we're either going to be able to photograph the Higgs boson particle by recreating the moment of the Big Bang in a controlled environment, and then, taking a shit ton of photos all at once in this small moment, and hopefully we can or, and they even say this, or we're going to open up a black hole or a portal or something like that. Like, okay. And then, by the way, what are they doing? They have like, Shiva the Destroyer in their courtyard, and they're doing like weird ceremonies around it. It's not really helping to combat the accusations there. So it feels like that's what the game is. It's like, how do we use technology? Is it AI? Is it a particle accelerator? Is it Hasbro coming out with the Ouija board app now? But these things always go together, the spiritual realm and technology.
Oh yeah. That whole Hadron Collider, I've always been just fascinated by that. I mean, I don't really understand. I've never really looked into it that closely, but holy shit, that thing is weird.
That's one of those things where you go like, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, did you ever see that really weird, it was like a sort of like a parade. It was like a ceremony, and there was a whole bunch of people dancing, and it went on for like 2 hours. Yeah. And I wasn't sure, did that have to do with like the Hadron Collider, or was that something else?
I've been told that this is a sort of a muddling of two separate things. I've always attributed it to a sort of a festival that Cern threw, because I think it does take place in Switzerland, in Geneva.
Yeah, it does. It does, yeah.
But they're trying to make this case that those two things are unrelated. But in that parade, you have like a Lord Voldemort kind of a character, right? He's like this gigantic, hooded, horrifying looking visage, and he is surrounded by nurses, and the nurses are all dancing, and I think there's even like, vaccines or some sort of like nod to that. And then people look at that event, and then they look at what happens all these years later, during the lockdowns, and they go, these two things are connected. And I certainly don't blame people for that. I don't know if that actually had anything to do with Cern, but it was weird. It was really weird. And there was even in this mix-up, there was like angelic creatures with like Bigfoot faces. So there was these winged, angel creatures, but they had the head of like a Bigfoot. The whole thing was like, what in the hell even is this?
Yeah, that was 2016. They did like it was like almost a Baphomet type creature, and they had naked people dancing at it was a ceremony. They called it like a resurrection ritual, and then they were just like, "Don't worry about it."
Yeah. Nothing going on here.
Yeah, like what the fuck are you guys really doing over there?
And I remember the weirdest thing about that was, they filmed the whole thing, and then after it ended, people kind of started. They're like people, like watching this in like a grandstand. People start getting up, and it's all like people in suits, like these, just kind of mysterious people, like really dressed up, looking really nice in suits. And it just seemed odd that this whole big group of people in really nice clothes was just sitting there watching this entire weird ass parade.
Yeah, I can't even find it. I'm trying to look for it, and you can't even. It's like, how would you even word that? Google's like, are you all right? I'm like, angel with Bigfoot head, nurses, large hooded character. It's like, we're calling the police, actually, right now. Stay where you are. I don't know how you would even go about finding it, but it definitely, for a while, I've never had it really dismissed. I just know like that was the notion, like, oh, you're conflating two events that have nothing to do with another. I'm like, all right, if that has nothing to do with Cern, I still want to know what the hell it has to do with, because even at Cern, they weren't doing that at Cern, but at Cern they do have, like I said, this Shiva the Destroyer kind of a character, which if you believe what we believe to be true, which is all these different religions, they have a pantheon of gods, but those pantheon of gods are actually also addressed in the Bible. They just happen to be these fallen entities that accepted the veneration and the worship of mankind, and then rebelled against God. And there was actually two incursions. One was the rebellion of Lucifer, and one was the fall of the Watchers. But through that lens, then it's already troubling. Then it becomes exponentially more troubling. You're like, what are you doing? You've got statues of fallen angels, and you're doing ceremonies, portals. Like, not good.
Yeah, no, it's weird stuff.
Yeah. There is one more thing that I wanted to talk to you about. We're kind of approaching this hour and a half mark. But one of the videos is actually something that I'm not familiar with at all. So I'm excited to hear about it. This idea of Arthur C. Clarke, a scary AI prediction from 1964.
Yeah. So basically, there was this video of Arthur C. Clarke kind of talking about how advanced AI will become. And again, this is like 60 years ago. And it's a really fascinating talk that he gives because Arthur C. Clarke was kind of like renowned for this ability to predict future technologies. He was talking about all these different technologies that I get into in the video, talking about them like 30, 40 years before they actually came out. He was talking about this is back in like the 1920s. He was talking about like a satellite system that would orbit the Earth, which seemed, just incomprehensible to a lot of people. And then he kind of went into detail of how it would work and everything. And, just basically nailed the prediction. So he has like this track record of constantly like predicting these technologies that years or decades down the road end up like actually becoming to be a thing. And so he's giving this interview about like just how advanced. This is, I think it's from like the 60s or 70s. It's from a long time ago, but he's being asked about how advanced computers are getting, which, the computers of back then are nothing compared to the computers of today. And he basically says, well, what we're doing is we're basically designing our own successors because these computers are getting so advanced that eventually they're just going to take over. And that was kind of like his prediction for what AI and like really advanced computing will become. And he just kind of says like, it'll almost be like our function to become obsolete once these things become so advanced and so powerful, just as, dinosaurs or whatever has roamed this earth before us became obsolete. And so his kind of prediction is that we're basically designing our successors. And he kind of gets into that. And then he just kind of ends it by saying like, and if that does end up happening down the road, it just is going to serve us right. Because, he's kind of like, I can just see this coming from a mile away, that we're designing our successors and they're just going to take us over. And if it happens, it serves us right. So it's an interesting thing.
That's what Elon said, the very guy who's creating these things. He used some very spooky language. I think he said, we're summoning the demon.
Absolutely. I mentioned that in the Spiricom video. I kind of get into like, could AI be used to contact these? And that was back in 2014.
Right.
He said with AI, as of 2014, like AI was not mainstream at all. People talked to him about like where it's going. And he's like, well, it's a tough situation because with AI, we're summoning the demon.
Yeah.
And it's just such a bizarre statement. Yeah.
We better get to work and start, we're going to integrate it into the biggest social media platform in the world. And everybody's going to have access to it.
Yeah.
We're going to put it in your head. Yeah.
Actually, we do have a minute left. Could you go over that Leonard Kill's brain implant while we're on the subject?
Yeah, it's a really interesting case. So this guy Leonard Kyle, he got I'm trying to remember. I always like kind of, when it's been years since I've done the video, I'm always kind of trying to remember the details. So he basically was complaining about really horrible headaches, and he got a brain implant from this Dr. Jose Delgado, who had all these talks about like almost like mass engineering and mass influencing people through like brain implants and things like that. He's got a really like Jose Delgado was the guy, if you've ever seen the video of the guy who's standing in the ring with the bull, and the bull charges at him, and he has electrodes implanted on the bull. And the bull's running full speed at him, and then he hits a button on this little device, and it gives him an electric shock, and it just stops the bull dead in its tracks. That's like kind of a famous experiment that he did. like a famous video, and it's pretty wild because he does it. It's something to do with like certain areas of the brain control certain, functions, and so he implants a little electrode on whatever part of the brain that controls this bull's legs. Bull's charging at him full speed, and he just stops it right in its tracks. He doesn't even flinch as it's running towards him. And so anyway, this Leonard Kyle guy was one of his patients, and he was complaining about headaches, and so they kind of implanted something in his. It was almost like a stimulator that they implanted in his head. This back in the 1960s, and essentially just drove him crazy. And he would always wear a garbage can or a metal garbage can because he claimed it would stop like the signals that were messing with his brain and giving him these really bad headaches.
That's right. This is one of the things that Kurt Metzger learned from you, and he was very excited about. It was the basically the creation of the tinfoil hat, right? There you go.
He wore a metal garbage can over his head because especially like microwaves would really mess with just drive him, give him these horrible headaches. And so he started first wearing a metal garbage can, and they built him a little tinfoil hat, and he would wear it around all the time, apparently. And it's interesting because there's a book from back then. It also got made into a Michael Douglas movie. It's called The Terminal Man. And the book was written by Michael Crichton, he wrote like Jurassic Park and a whole bunch of other movies. And Michael Crichton was actually studying at the hospital where this Leonard Kyle guy was being treated out in Boston. And so he based this movie, The Terminal Man, on this Leonard Kyle case, which is kind of like a notorious case in a bit, but it's pretty interesting.
I think what's worth noting here, and especially as we kind of draw to a close, the point is tinfoil hats work.
Yes.
That's the real takeaway here. I often think about that. I'm like, I love the romance and the idea that like one day, if anything ever really did happen, like if the conspiracy theorists are right and they're going to crank the 5G up one day and they're going to, barbecue us or turn us all into like hyper aggressive kind of creatures like Kingsman, the film Kingsman. Yeah. That your saving grace may just be the thing that they ridiculed you for all these years. So guys, prepare your tinfoil hats. You never know when you might need them.
If Elon was smart, he will be designing the Neuralink specifically to bypass the tinfoil hat. This is their main adversary.
That's just the one technology that he's like, you cannot figure out a way around. John McAfee, before he died, whatever happened to John McAfee, he was in like a Faraday room. And essentially it was just a room that he was in that was covered walls, ceiling, floors in essentially tinfoil. And so if it's good enough for John McAfee, it's good enough for me. But Andy, this was a wonderful episode, and I really want to thank you for giving us your time and sharing this information for us. For the audience, one more time, let them know where they can find your work.
Just YouTube, Control Alt History. I am on like Twitter and Instagram. I haven't been too active, but that was kind of one of my resolutions, was to start doing more with those sites. But yeah, primarily YouTube is kind of where I post some of my longer videos right now.
Well, you have great content over on Control Alt History, so I highly recommend people checking it out. And it's really cool to see you getting your due. I'm really glad that you were mentioned on Tinfoil Hat. It put you on our radar, and I feel like we're better for it. I think a lot of people probably are. So I'm glad that you're getting to make the rounds right now, and I hope you keep this momentum up and do some more cool stuff. We'll be watching.
Hey, I really appreciate you having me on.
Of course. Top, do we have anything else?
No, we'll be back in another hour or so with another show. And then after that, another show for me tonight. But yeah, man, thank you guys for tuning in. And like I always say, don't forget to obey, submit, and comply. We'll see you next time.
The greatest hypnotist on planet Earth is a oblong box in the corner of the room. It is constantly telling us what to believe is real. If you can persuade me that what they see with their eyes is what there is to see, because they'll laugh in the face of an explanation that portrays the bigger picture of what's happening. And they have.